It was on March 17, 1982, as spring began to reveal the harsh winter's secrets in the Ozark Hills of Missouri, that an assistant social worker named Margaret Wilson visited an isolated cabin in Shannon County. What she discovered there would forever change her understanding of the limits of social isolation and the consequences of institutional neglect within America's rural communities. Located 27 kilometers from the nearest town, Current River, the Shelton property was accessible only by a dirt road that became impassable during the spring rains. For over 3 decades, the family had lived with virtually no contact with the outside world. Margaret's visit was motivated by an anonymous complaint to the Missouri Department of Social Services, which claimed that children were living in unhealthy conditions and possibly suffering from abuse. Upon her arrival at the property, Margaret was met by Elijah Shelton, a 47-year-old man of medium stature with a gray beard and intense blue eyes that seemed to carry the weight of generations of isolation. Living in the cabin with Elijah were his sister, Martha Shelton, 43, and 3 children, Thomas, 12, Suddy, 9, and little Jacob, who was just 5 years old. The cabin, a wooden structure built by Elijah's grandfather in the 1920s, consisted of 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room. A small barn, a vegetable garden, and a well were on the property. There was no electricity or piped water. Their isolation was nearly total, with only occasional trips to town for supplies they could not produce themselves. The day's climate was mild, with a temperature of 17 degrees Celsius and a partially cloudy sky. The recent thaw had left the ground around the cabin muddy, and the air carried the characteristic smell of wetland and decaying wood. During her initial inspection, Margaret noticed the children showed signs of mild malnutrition and a lack of basic medical care. On his right arm, Thomas had a badly healed scar, the result of an axe accident the previous year. Suddy had a slight strabismus that had never been treated. Jacob, the youngest, showed signs of cognitive developmental delay for his age. What caught Margaret's attention, however, were the striking physical similarities between the children and the 2 adults. They all shared striking features, the same intense blue eyes, the same facial bone structure, the same ear shape, characteristics that suggested not just kinship, but a very close consanguinity. When asked about the children's mother, Elijah hesitated for a moment before answering that his wife had died during Jacob's delivery. Martha remained silent, avoiding eye contact with the social worker. It was at this moment that Margaret began to suspect the story made no sense. County records held no marriage certificate for Elijah Shelton. In fact, the only documents found were the birth certificates of Elijah and Martha, children of Harold and Edith Shelton, and a land ownership record dated 1924. The children themselves had no official birth certificates. The Shelton family had gradually become isolated after the death of Elijah and Martha's parents in a fire in 1973. Since that time, the siblings had cut almost all ties with the local community, visiting the city only for basic necessities. Residents of Current River described Elijah as a reserved and suspicious man who avoided prolonged interactions. If you have not subscribed the channel, kindly subscribe it and press the bell icon for such latest videos. The first suspicions that Martha could be the children's biological mother began to form in Margaret's mind as she observed the family dynamics. The way Jacob clung to Martha's skirts, how she intuitively knew each child's needs, and how her gaze revealed a deep maternal bond that went beyond that of an aunt. If you want to follow more cases like this, cases that shake society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any investigation. A formal investigation into the Shelton case began on March 24, 1982, a week after Margaret Wilson's initial visit. The Missouri Department of Social Services, together with the Shannon County Sheriff, sent a team to evaluate the situation. The team consisted of Margaret, Officer David Tanner, and Dr. Robert Hayes, a pediatrician. The first obstacle the team encountered was Elijah's resistance. When confronted with more direct questions about the children's origin, he became defensive, claiming the authorities had no right to interfere in his family's life. "We take care of our own," he repeated, a phrase that would later reveal a disturbing meaning. Martha, in turn, remained silent, responding only with monosyllables when questioned directly. The children demonstrated a mix of curiosity and fear towards the visitors, revealing their limited contact with people outside the family unit. Dr. Hayes performed basic physical exams on the children and observed several worrying signs. In addition to mild malnutrition and a lack of preventive medical care, he observed physical characteristics that could indicate genetic problems consistent with endogamy. Thomas had polydactyly, an extra finger on his left hand. Suddy had dental development problems, and Jacob showed signs of cognitive impairment more severe than initially perceived. These signs, when observed in isolation, can have several causes, Dr. Hayes explained in his report. But when observed together, added to the shared physical characteristics and family isolation, they raise serious concerns about possible consanguinity. The investigation took a more precise turn when the team gained access to the family's few medical records. In 1970, Martha had been treated in a hospital in a neighboring county after a domestic accident. The doctor had noted she was 3 months pregnant. However, there was no record of any birth or adoption from that period. A deeper search revealed a pattern. Martha had been treated at different regional hospitals in 1970, 1973, and 1977, years that would correspond approximately to the ages of Thomas, Suddy, and Jacob. Each time, she used different names, but basic physical descriptions and medical data indicated it was the same person. The investigation hit a significant obstacle when Elijah, sensing the direction of events, prevented investigators from entering the property. Legally, without concrete evidence of severe abuse or neglect, the authorities had limited options for intervention. It was at this moment that a crucial witness emerged. Sarah Jenkins, an 83-year-old woman living about 5 kilometers from the Shelton property, contacted Margaret after hearing rumors about the investigation. Sarah revealed she had been a friend of Edith, the mother of Elijah and Martha, and that she had maintained sporadic contact with the family even after their isolation. Edith was always afraid something like this would happen, Sarah said. Harold kept the family isolated, saying the world was corrupt and that they could only trust their own blood. When they died in that fire, I tried to help the young ones, but Elijah was already too much like his father, suspicious, hostile. Sarah revealed that she had visited the cabin a few times after the parents' death, bringing supplies and offering assistance. During one visit in 1971, she noticed Martha was visibly pregnant. When she questioned them about it, Elijah expelled her from the property and forbade her from returning. "I should have done something then," Sarah lamented. "But who would have believed me? And where would those children have ended up? The system doesn't take good care of our own here." Sarah's testimony provided important context, but it was not definitive proof. The investigation needed concrete evidence to intervene. A turnaround occurred when an agent reviewing the birth records of Elijah and Martha discovered something intriguing. Their parents, Harold and Edith Shelton, had shared the same surname before marriage. Subsequent investigations revealed they were first cousins. "This is not uncommon in isolated communities like this," explained a local historian consulted by the team. In the early decades of the 20th century, many families in mountainous regions lived so isolated that marriages between close relatives happened due to a lack of options. In some cases, it became almost a family tradition, justified by beliefs about blood purity. This discovery shed new light on the case. It wasn't just a possible incestuous relationship between Elijah and Martha, but potentially a pattern of generational endogamy that had intensified over time. The team developed a new theory. Elijah and Martha's parents, already cousins, had passed isolationist beliefs to their children. After the parents' death, the siblings, already socially isolated and possibly influenced by distorted ideas about family and purity, had established an incestuous relationship resulting in 3 children. The investigation briefly encountered an obstacle when a local resident claimed to have seen a different woman on the Shelton property in the early 1970s. This information briefly reinforced the theory of a third person involved, perhaps a wife of Elijah who later disappeared. However, subsequent investigations revealed the witness had likely confused the property or the date. If you have not subscribed the channel, kindly subscribe it and press the bell icon for such latest videos. Sheriff John Pearson began considering obtaining a court order to collect DNA samples from the children and adults. However, the legal process was complicated, especially given the family's isolation and the lack of conclusive evidence of abuse justifying such an invasive step. "We have to act carefully here," argued the sheriff. "These people have lived this way for generations. To them, this is normal life. If we invade the property without concrete evidence, we could lose any chance of helping these children." The investigation reached an impasse that would last for months. During this period, the Department of Social Services maintained regular visits to the property, monitoring the children's well-being and gradually trying to build a relationship of trust with the family. The real turnaround in the Shelton case occurred in September 1982, 6 months after the investigation began. During a routine visit, Margaret Wilson noticed that Jacob, the youngest, had a high fever and signs of a severe respiratory infection. Despite Elijah's initial resistance, she convinced him to allow the child to be taken to the hospital in West Plains, the nearest large city. At the hospital, Dr. Michael Brennan, a genetic specialist consulted on the case, took the opportunity to perform more in-depth exams with Elijah's reluctant consent. Jacob's test results revealed multiple subtle congenital anomalies that individually might have gone unnoticed, but together formed a pattern consistent with a high degree of consanguinity. "The genetic markers we are observing here," Dr. Brennan told the team, "are typical of children born from relationships between first-degree relatives. There is an excess of homozygosity that is excessive even for first-cousin relationships." During Jacob's 2-week hospitalization for pneumonia complications, Martha remained constantly by his side, demonstrating striking maternal care and anxiety. It was during this period that Martha, physically and emotionally exhausted, finally began to open up to Margaret. One night, while Jacob slept under medication, Martha shared fragments of her story. She spoke of the growing isolation after their parents' death, how Elijah gradually assumed the role of family patriarch, and how the boundaries between family roles became blurred. "We didn't know anyone else," Martha confessed in an almost inaudible whisper. "Elijah said the outside world wanted to separate us, to hurt us. We could only trust each other." Although Martha did not explicitly admit to being the children's biological mother, her words and emotions made the situation increasingly clear to Margaret. The social worker, taking extreme care not to break the fragile trust, avoided direct questions about paternity, focusing instead on offering emotional support. Meanwhile, the documentary investigation continued. A significant advance came when researchers located a traveling pastor, Reverend Samuel Miller, who had visited isolated Ozark communities in the 1960s and 70s. Reverend Miller kept detailed diaries of his visits. An entry dated June 1969 described a visit to the Shelton property, "Visited the Shelton family today. Their parents recently died tragically, leaving 2 adult children, Elijah, 34, and Martha, 30. Found them living in extreme poverty and isolation. Something in the dynamics between the siblings seemed disturbing. Martha appeared submissive, almost fearful. I fear that without their parents' moderating influence, the situation may deteriorate." A later entry from April 1971 was more revealing, returned to the Shelton property after nearly 2 years. Prevented from entering by Elijah, who seemed more hostile and paranoid. "From a distance, I saw Martha briefly. She appeared to be in an advanced state of pregnancy. I reported my concerns to the local sheriff, but was told nothing could be done without concrete evidence. These mountains keep their secrets, and I fear some are too dark for the light of day." Reverend Miller's diary provided the first contemporary evidence of Martha's pregnancy. Another crucial event occurred when authorities located medical records from a Springfield hospital showing Mary Smith was treated in 1977 in advanced labor and gave birth to a boy with health complications. The date coincided with Jacob's age, and the physical description matched Martha. The medical team had noted concerns about possible genetic abnormalities. While Jacob recovered, Dr. Brennan, with limited judicial authorization, performed additional exams revealing the boy had Apert syndrome, a rare genetic condition characterized by malformations of the skull, face, hands, and feet. This syndrome can occur spontaneously, but its incidence increases significantly with close consanguinity. Based on the new evidence, Judge Eleanor Simmons issued a warrant authorizing DNA tests for all Shelton family members. The results, obtained in November 1982, were conclusive. Elijah was the biological father and Martha the biological mother of all 3 children. Leave a comment. Never give up on the truth. If you believe all cases of family abuse deserve investigation, no matter how isolated the community. On December 7, 1982, based on genetic evidence and testimony, Elijah Shelton was formally charged with incest, a Class D felony in Missouri punishable by up to 4 years in prison. Martha, considered a victim due to evidence of prolonged psychological coercion, faced no criminal charges, but her ability to care for the children was questioned in court. Elijah Shelton's trial began in February 1983, attracting significant regional media attention. The Shannon County Court hosted one of the most complex and morally challenging cases in its history. Elijah's defense, led by public defender Gerald Thompson, argued that extreme isolation and the dysfunctional environment in which he was raised had compromised his ability to discern basic social and moral norms. The defendant, Thompson argued, is the product of generational isolation and possibly prior endogamy. If you have not subscribed the channel, kindly subscribe it and press the bell icon for such latest videos. The prosecution, represented by Amanda Lewis, acknowledged the mitigating circumstances but maintained that Elijah understood the nature of his actions. He demonstrated the ability to interact with the community, conduct business, and deliberately hide the true nature of his relationship with his sister. These are not the actions of someone unable to distinguish right from wrong. Martha Shelton testified behind closed doors. Excerpts from her testimony revealed a pattern of psychological manipulation that began after their parents' deaths. "He told us we were special," said Martha. "That our blood was pure, that our children would be strong because they wouldn't be contaminated by the outside world. At first I resisted, but after years alone with him, I started to believe." Dr. Richard Foster, a psychiatrist specializing in isolation and abusive family dynamics, testified as an expert witness. "What we see here is a classic case of an alternative reality constructed through isolation. When a person is systematically excluded from all normative social references, their perception of what is acceptable can be radically distorted." The trial also highlighted the failure of local institutions to identify and intervene. Concerns have been expressed by at least 3 different people over the years: Reverend Miller, neighbor Sarah Jenkins, and a store employee, yet no proper follow-up was conducted by the authorities. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury found Elijah Shelton guilty of incest but recommended leniency due to mitigating circumstances. Judge Simmons sentenced him to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months, and ordered compulsory psychological treatment. In her final statement, Judge Simmons noted, "This case represents a collective failure, not just of the defendant, who is still responsible for his actions, but of a society that allows families to be left behind by our protection systems." Geographical isolation should not mean institutional abandonment. The children were placed in temporary state custody while Martha received intensive psychological treatment. The goal was family reunification. The children were placed in a foster home where they began to receive formal education and medical care. Thomas demonstrated remarkable resilience, rapidly catching up educationally. Suddy had more difficulty with social adaptation but responded well to treatment for her strabismus. Jacob underwent several surgeries and received intensive therapy for his developmental delays. Comprehensive genetic tests revealed all 3 children carried multiple anomalies resulting from endogamy. Thomas had minor issues like polydactyly. Suddy had a rare enzymatic deficiency requiring continuous medication. Jacob suffered from Apert syndrome, requiring lifelong care. The Shelton case triggered policy changes in Missouri. The Shelton Law, passed in 1985, established stricter protocols for monitoring families in isolated areas, including regular wellness checks. Elijah Shelton served 22 months before being released on parole in 1985. He was prohibited from returning to the family property while the children were in Martha's care and had to undergo continuous therapy. Martha, after 2 years of intensive care, regained custody of the children in 1984. With state assistance, she moved to a small house near West Plains. She earned her GED and found work as a library assistant. In the following decades, Thomas overcame his adversities and graduated in social work, dedicating his career to helping vulnerable children. Suddy faced more difficulties but found stability as an artist and artisan. Jacob achieved a semi-independent life and became an advocate for the rights of people with disabilities in rural areas. The Shelton case remains an iconic study in social work and law schools, illustrating the complex intersections of geographic isolation, rural poverty, dysfunctional family dynamics, and institutional failures. It also highlights the physical and psychological effects of endogamy. In 2002, a retired Margaret Wilson reflected on the case. What's most impressive, looking back, is how something so extreme could happen practically in plain sight. It makes us wonder how many other similar cases exist, hidden in remote valleys or in view of everyone, waiting for someone to pay attention. The original Shelton property, abandoned for years, was eventually sold by the state in 1990. The cabin collapsed over time, but the land remains a silent reminder of how extreme isolation can distort reality and perpetuate cycles of harm for generations. If you've watched this far, it's because you care about cases that mark families forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here, so I know who really cares about the search for truth." Don't forget to like this video and share it with those who value understanding human complexity and the importance of effective protection systems. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now to follow more investigations that make us reflect on our society and collective responsibility.